صباح الخير. Good morning, dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Good morning, listeners. Sorry about that little stuff up earlier on. I went a little bit early. So here we are, a couple of days out of the next Israeli election and following the visit of Israeli president to Australia, the third time a sitting president's visited our shores. Again, sadly, he was feted like some sort of rock star. The reception for him in Parliament and across many of the events that he attended, which were within the Jewish community, had him receive the Beatles-like 1963 receptions. Whilst he was here, of course, he spoke about opportunities for Australia to increase its business dealings with the apartheid state of Israel. Sadly, nothing was done to raise the prospects of Palestine or talk about Trump. Well, certainly nothing that was reported about. At least some of our politicians made representations to the president about the awful case of Malka Leifer, the Australian Jewish woman who's now a citizen of the state of Israel, who abused at least two young girls in her care, and who remains in Israel with arguably asylum based on the fact that she's had in excess of 100 court cases and yet to be extradited back to Australia. And then following that, following her repatriation to Australia, there'll be some people that will really need to answer some questions as to how Malka Leifer was able to escape. Four Corners did a very interesting story on that, and if you'd like, you should just Google ABC and then find out exactly how she got out of Australia. The election in Israel happens on Tuesday, and the rhetoric has really stepped up. Regular listeners will remember the show that Robert Yusuf and I did last year, where we dubbed a documentary, an Arabic documentary into English, about the Hebron Ibrahimi Mosque massacre. If you go to 3cr.org.au and search podcasts, you'll be able to look that one up. It was a year ago this week. And I say a year ago this week because we've just commemorated the 26th anniversary of the Ibrahimi Mosque, where Dr. Baruch Goldstein, a New York doctor, took a fully automatic weapon into the Ibrahimi Mosque. And whilst worshippers were in the middle of prayer, and many of you know how Muslims pray, they're kneeling on the ground, lying with their faces bowed to God, bowed to the ground. In prayer, Baruch Goldstein took his fully automatic weapon and killed 29 people and injured over 100 others. Now, I recall this massacre because we should always remember massacres and those that were killed. The day before the massacre, sitting indicted Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the day before the anniversary, the Ibrahim Mosque, and made it very clear to the rabid and fanatical Jewish settlers in Hebron, the 300-odd, close to 400 settlers there, that are protected by between 2,500 and 4,000 Israeli soldiers in a neighbourhood of 300,000 Palestinians. He told them that they're never leaving. Now, the sort of virtual signalling, dog whistle politics of attending the mosque the day before the 26th anniversary of that massacre really gives you a taste for exactly where the Israeli election is at. And it really, I tell you that myself and many of my friends, we held our breaths with worry as to what this sort of really a fascist display in power, to visit a massacre site the day before the 26th anniversary, to tell those people that are there, that those illegal Jewish settlers, that we're not going anywhere. There was a real fear amongst Palestinians, advocates, their supporters worldwide, as to whether this might be a trigger for a really huge round of violence. Thankfully, that didn't occur, and that provocation didn't serve to be anything. We also heard from the Israeli Defense Minister Naftali Bennett, who decided that he would approve 1,900 new settlements in the West Bank, all whilst we're waiting for Trump's plan of the century to come to fruition. And he said, in order to achieve this goal, we must continue the settlement enterprise. Settlement is one of the poles of Zionism, so we must expand and continue to go ahead with it. He said Israel will never give up 1 inch of land to the Arabs. Now, this is a very senior member of the Likud party, of the ruling government. Netanyahu's gone categorically said he's be annexing the Jordan Valley, rendering a Palestinian state a floating archipelago within Israel, whatever its borders might be, ever-expanding borders. He's out-Netanyahu'd himself, in fact, to marginalise Benny Gantz and the Blue and White Party. The election is Monday into Tuesday, Australia time, so I'm sure by next week we'll be able to report as to the outcome. We won't be able to report, I don't think, who's going to be the Prime Minister, based on the lack of a constitution in Israel and the ease with which micro parties can get seats. Nobody's going to get a majority in and of themselves, and so the cobbling of coalitions to rule government is what needs to occur, and that's why Netanyahu is doing that sort of rabid racist work within Hebron, to send a signal to all the settler mindsets, all of those people who do not want a Palestinian state within the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza, excuse me, that don't want that, vote for me and you'll be sure that won't happen. Interestingly, as provocative as that visit to the Ibrahimi Mosque was, the fact that he visited the day before the massacre wasn't news. What was news was the fact that Netanyahu was there whilst there was a Korean tourist party there, and they were excited to see the Prime Minister of Israel. I'm not sure why. I wouldn't be excited to see him. They were excited to see him, and they rushed towards him, wanting to shake his hands, and they reached out with eager anticipation that they might get to touch him, and he flinched in fear with his hands to his chest and body, saying, "No handshakes, no handshakes." And what was shown, particularly within Israeli media, was the fact that he refused to shake hands. And his wife, Sarah, was saying, this is at the request of the government. We've got to make sure that there's no spread of coronavirus. Anyway, there's a little bit for you. We had some good stuff coming out of New Zealand. We've got to love New Zealand. Not only do they have the best Prime Minister in the world, but they have a very, very active and effective Palestine solidarity group. We really need to do a show on the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and the working definition of anti-Semitism that is sadly sweeping most of the Western world. In fact, Australia recently joined that. It was developed in 2016, and it stated very clearly. I mean, we all know what anti-Semitism is. We've spoken about it before, and the hatred of a people just because they're Jewish, the invoking of Jewish stereotypes, it is amongst the most vile of racism. It's it's on the same level and should be treated the same as homophobia, Islamophobia, etc. But the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA, created a working definition of anti-Semitism. And, it states that anti-Semitism is a perception of Jewish people which can be expressed towards hatreds towards them. There are 11 working examples of in the IHRA. And the challenge with those 11 examples, and remembering that what we're supposed to be doing is addressing the hatred towards Jewish people and the fact that might manifest itself into violence, exclusion, etc. Of the 11 examples in the working definition, seven of them talk about action against Israel. Now, if its primary purpose was to combat the hatred against Jewish people, you'd think that all 11 examples would be about Jewish stereotypes, etc., etc. Instead, 7 of them talk about actions against the State of Israel. Now, we well know, if you criticise Australia's refugee policy, if we were to criticise Australia's climate policy, if we were to criticise the New Start allowance, that doesn't make us anti-Australian. We're criticising a government's inaction on things that, as citizens, as members of a community, we don't accept. So too, criticising the State of Israel's actions is not anti-Semitic. Now, if you indulge yourself into Jewish stereotypes about Rothschilds and money controlling and money lending and big noses and those fake tropes, blood libels, well, you're an anti-Semite, and we don't want you. In Palestine advocacy, Palestine solidarity, we do not want anti-Semites. We will not accept anti-Semites. In the same vein, we won't accept anti-Islamists, people who are homophobic. We are a broad coalition of fair-thinking people. Now, the IHRA has been adopted in many Western countries. Australia signed on recently. It hasn't enacted itself into any form of legislation, but surreptitiously one of the manners in which it's getting increasingly adopted is to get local councils to adopt it. And, I mean, in a reality, a local council has no power to implement anything to do it. I mean, it's, virtue signalling in and of its best. But it's a good thing, when councils say they're going to do stuff, and the representative bodies, and in particular in Australia, we know those councils, and we applaud them, that won't do nationalisation ceremonies on Invasion Day. And that's a good thing. It's beyond virtue signalling. They're actually taking an action and a stance that is right and proper. The IHRA, increasingly, trying to find surreptitious means to force its way into legislation beyond a working definition and advice level, if you will, and become legislation. And that is the case in the United States, where Donald Trump signed an executive order adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and now forces entities and government-funded institutions to use that. What it does is stifle free speech and stifle the opportunity for solidarity activists, for Palestinians and their supporters, to criticise the state's actions. They tried to get this up in Wellington, and to the great credit of those Palestinian advocates and their supporters and their Jewish friends, in fact, from the Wellington Progressive Synagogue. They wrote into that council, and they noted that the definition conflates anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, and the two are not the same. One can be an anti-Zionist without being an anti-Semite. And to their great credit, the Wellington City Council withdrew the motion. There's still talk about them bringing it back up, but the reality is we hope that and believe that the Wellington City Council is going to move away from that now, and that the free thought and correct thinking has made its way forward. We also had a win in the United Kingdom, and for those that followed the election of Boris Johnson in the past few months, and watched a perfectly decent man, a human being of integrity and morals that have been proven time and time again for something of the order of 4 decades. A man who was arrested in protesting apartheid, a man who has been at the forefront of social justice movements, of socialism, of every bit of humanity that one might mention. We've seen the vilification of Jeremy Corbyn over the past couple of years, since he almost won the election, almost 3 years ago. The campaign in the tabloid press in the United Kingdom, led in no small part by the Jewish Chronicle, saw sadly, I'm not sure that it was the single biggest contributor to Jeremy Corbyn's loss and Boris Johnson's win, but it certainly was a very ugly campaign. So the Jewish Chronicle is a newspaper, much like our Australian Jewish News. I suspect it was, has a particular constituency, and it's, runs its own agenda. But it had to apologise to a Labor activist, Audrey White. It had to remove 4 articles that they published about her that formed the basis of many other articles and op-eds and radio talkback stuff. And we can't limit our understanding of the power of the thought creation. When you're a community and you create a thought and document it and become the thought leader and the originator of opinion, where that ends up, no one can know. But they wrote 4 articles about her. They had to apologise. They had to take the article down. They had to pay a substantial sum in compensation. And this is the I think a little bit of a disturbing bit. The UK press regulator had been investigating them for some months, and they said that the Jewish Chronicle had hampered the investigation. They were significantly misleading, and the paper had engaged in unacceptable obstruction of the investigation. So that's really, really good win. Sadly, many Labor activists within the UK have struggled to get the same sort of redress. And in particular, a fabulous woman, a black Jewish anti-Zionist woman who was expelled from the Labor Party, Miss Jackie Walker, like a really fantastic human being. False charges, and they put a movie together, and she's going to use that money to show a movie in the upcoming Labor conference. This same Jewish Chronicle was also forced to pay £60,000 in libel damage to Interpol. This is a British charity that works and creates with aid projects with the Palestinians. They called Interpol a terrorist organisation. This is an entity that's over 30 years old and has been the subject of many investigations. So a couple of fantastic results there. And we look forward to, and we've already had the situation, and we'll hopefully report on it more in the future, about Melissa Park, who, a former Member of Parliament, was running in Western Australia, and a series of articles got written about her being an anti-Semite. And I read a couple of months ago the West Australian had apologised to her, had withdrawn their the op-eds that they'd written about her, and in fact gave her the opportunity to publish a very, very stern and strong opinion piece that Melissa wrote herself. So just in view of where the IHRA is, we might need a definition of anti-Palestinianism and, really hold those people to account. Welcome back. Just when you think apartheid can't get any more apartheid, along comes Amazon to the rescue. Just recently, this looks like a duck, quacks like a duck. Maybe it is a duck, yeah. And I'm pretty sure if it wasn't enough for Trump to create, 6 Bantustans and call it New Palestine and give us Abu Dis and not Jerusalem as a capital, and no refugee can go home, and Palestine's a half a state. Amazon comes to the rescue and teaches us all a brand new reason to know that Israel is an apartheid state. In the illegal settlements that is in the West Bank, you can, if you order something on Amazon, as I'm sure many people do, you click in delivery and you write down whatever the village or the town you are in a settlement and click Israel as the country, and you get free delivery. Now, if you're a Palestinian city or village, and that illegal settlement is built on your historic agricultural lands and what's supposed to be Palestine, so you're next door, a couple of kilometres perhaps as the crow flies, and you order the same item from the same website and click Palestinian territories, well, good news, you're going to have to pay $24 in delivery fee. What a wonderful way for Amazon to treat the Palestinians. But it's been outed now, so fingers crossed the right thing gets done. Sadly, as we know, the reality of that actually occurring is probably slim, but we can still hope. But it's not just American companies that are condoning apartheid. It's just recently within Israel proper. Within the 78% of Palestine and Israel took control of the Jewish state. There's a ride-hailing service called Get, G-T-T. It's a global firm, but has its origins in Israel. And it's got a unique, they call it a unique offering. It's called Meridin. And it's offered to religiously observant Jews, and it's what it actually is a racist service that provides taxis with Jewish drivers. And what it means is you can get on that app much like an Uber, but you can actually make sure that you get a Jewish driver. As we know, within Israel, 20% of the population of Israel are not Jewish. 1 in 5 people is Christian or Muslim, Arab. And what this app allows you to do is make sure that you get a Jewish driver. Now, that's absolutely racist. And the challenge is there's a debate in Israel as to whether or not it is racist. That's the level, sadly, of where that society is sitting at the moment. Thankfully, there's a group of human rights lawyers who are suing Get, and the claim is something of the order of $50 million. So fingers crossed that that case will be successful, and we can endeavour to get some justice there. I might just quote something from they secretly recorded the CEO, and he said this. Let me tell you a secret. Get Meridin is not for religious Jews. It's for people who don't want an Arab driver. When my daughter wants to travel, I call her a Get Meridin. She doesn't care if the driver is religious or not, because what she wants to be sure of is that she's got a Jewish driver. He also went on to say, he said, I've got 1,500 Arab drivers, and not one of them works for Meridin, nor will they. Really sickening language. And this is, sadly, increasingly, some of the space that is available for these sorts of racist ideas. And it comes from the top, as we know, when the leaders of a country say there's, no, there won't be a Palestinian state. The Likud Charter, Benjamin Netanyahu's ruling coalition party, explicitly within their charter says that there will be no Palestinian state. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I had hoped to bring you a special interview from Palestine. We're still trying to make sure that happens. But we've had another epiphany in Europe. 50 former leaders from across Europe. And when I say leaders, we're talking about people who are prime ministers, foreign ministers, people not without significant power. For instance, Douglas Alexander, who's a former Minister for Europe and Secretary of State of International Development from the United Kingdom, Ben Bradshaw, some really huge names. These people have decided now, when they have no power, they've had their epiphany on Palestine, and they've written an op-ed in The Guardian about the deal of the century, and they say explicitly that this violates the most fundamental principles of international law. The map featured in the plan proposes Palestinian enclaves under permanent Israeli military control, which evoke chilling associations with South Africa's Bantustans. We know that the duck is a duck. It quacks like a duck, looks like a duck. It is apartheid. Israel is an apartheid state. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you join me next week when I hope to be bringing you a special interview from Palestine. Thanks again, and look forward to speaking to you next week.